We found you a match, Mr. Morrison, but just keep an open mind." The matchmaker's words echoed in Jake's head as he stood outside Riverside Cafe, watching couples through the window. He'd been rejected twice before. Apparently, single dads with 7-year-olds weren't exactly hot commodities in the dating world. But today, someone had said yes. He pushed through the door, scanning the tables. Then he saw her. She sat by the window in a wheelchair, back straight, coffee untouched, eyes that seemed to be calculating exactly how long it would take him to turn around and leave. Their gazes locked. "So," she said before he could speak, voice carrying across the quiet cafe, "are you going to sit down? Or are we doing this the honest way, where you just walk out now?" Jake Morrison had learned to read people in the 7 years since Ivy left. You had to, when you were raising a kid alone, and every babysitter, every teacher, every parent at the playground sized you up like a math problem that didn't add up. Single dad, plus no wedding ring, plus work boots covered in dust, equaled someone to pity or avoid. He'd gotten good at spotting the look, that slight tightening around the eyes, the way smiles became thinner, more careful. The woman at the table wasn't giving him that look. She was giving him something worse. Challenge. Like she'd already decided he'd fail and was just waiting for confirmation. Jake walked to the table, pulled out the chair and sat down. His hands were shaking slightly, so he tucked them under his thighs. "I'm Jake," he said, because apparently his brain had forgotten every other word in the English language. "Claire," she replied. Her voice was steady, controlled, the kind of voice that came from boardrooms, not coffee shops. "Claire Hartwell. And before you ask, yes, I knew what I was signing up for. The question is, did you?" He hadn't expected her to be so direct. Most first dates involved 20 minutes of small talk about weather and traffic before anyone said anything real. "The matchmaker mentioned you might be different," Jake said carefully. "She didn't say how different." Claire's lips curved, but it wasn't quite a smile. "That's one word for it. Paralyzed from the waist down since I was 8 years old is probably more accurate. Car accident. My parents didn't make it. I did, with a titanium rod in my spine and a lifetime supply of physical therapy." She lifted her coffee cup, took a sip, set it down with precise control. "There, now you know the tragic backstory. Your turn." Jake felt like he'd been punched. Not by the information itself, but by the way she delivered it, like she was ripping off a bandage before he could flinch. "My wife left when our son was 6 months old," he heard himself say. "Said she didn't sign up for a life of struggling to pay rent and eating pasta 4 nights a week. I was working 2 jobs, trying to keep us afloat, and she just walked out one morning, left a note on the kitchen counter next to the empty formula can." Something shifted in Claire's expression. The armor cracked, just slightly. "How old is your son now?" 7. Ethan. He draws pictures of families with 3 people holding hands. Jake's throat felt tight. "He doesn't remember her. Sometimes I think that's a mercy. Sometimes I think it's the saddest thing in the world." Claire was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in slow circles on the table. When she looked up, her eyes were softer. "I grew up with my grandmother in a trailer park outside Eugene. She worked 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed, cleaned offices at night, did alterations during the day, took in ironing on weekends. I learned to fight before I learned to love." She paused. "I'm a department head at a tech firm now. Comfortable life. But I remember what it's like to choose between electricity and groceries." The cafe hummed around them, espresso machine hissing, low conversations blending into background noise. Jake looked at Claire, really looked at her. She was wearing a grey sweater, simple but well-made, and a thin silver watch that caught the light. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and there was something about her posture, even seated in the wheelchair, that radiated competence. This was a woman who had learned to occupy space unapologetically. "I need to be honest with you," Jake said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "I signed up for this matchmaking thing because I wanted a partner, someone to help me raise Ethan, someone to share the load with. And looking at you now—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I don't think I have the capacity for this. I barely keep my own life together. I don't know how to—" "How? Take care of someone in a wheelchair?" Claire finished for him, her voice cool again. "I don't need taking care of, Jake. I have a modified van I drive myself. I have a job that pays 6 figures. I can cook, clean, and do everything you can do, just from a different height. What I needed from this date was to meet someone who wouldn't see the wheelchair first." She let out a breath. "But I appreciate the honesty. Most men just ghost after the first look." Jake felt shame crawl up his neck. "That's not what I meant. I know what you meant." Claire's expression softened slightly. "You meant you're already stretched thin, emotionally and physically, and adding another person with their own complications feels impossible. I get it, I do." She paused. "But here's a thought. What if we just tried being friends? I could use one. And your son sounds like he needs proof that good women exist in the world." Friends. The word hung in the air between them, strange and unexpected. Jake thought about Ethan, about the questions he'd started asking lately. Why don't I have a mom? Why do other kids have 2 parents? Am I the reason she left? "Why would you want to be friends with someone who just basically said, 'You're too much work'?" Jake asked. "Jake, sir." Claire's smile was genuine this time, reaching her eyes. "Because you said it to my face instead of behind it. Because you're sitting here when you clearly want to run. And because—" She hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across her features. "Because you remind me of someone. Someone who gave me something when I had nothing. And I think maybe I owe it forward." Jake didn't understand what she meant, but something in her tone made him not want to push. Instead, he found himself nodding. "Okay. Friends. But I'm terrible at texting and I work weird hours, and Ethan talks about dinosaurs approximately 70% of the time." "I like dinosaurs," Claire said. "And I work from home most days, so weird hours are fine. We'll figure it out as we go." They exchanged phone numbers. When Claire rolled toward the exit, Jake held the door open, and she gave him a look that said thank you, and don't make a habit of it in equal measure. He watched her navigate to a modified van in the parking lot, transferring from the wheelchair with practiced efficiency. The whole process took maybe 30 seconds, smooth and competent. As Jake drove home, he thought about the way Claire had looked at him. Not with pity, not with judgment, just seeing him. It had been a long time since anyone had really seen him. His phone buzzed at a red light, a text from an unknown number. "Thanks for not lying. Most men do. Claire." Jake stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Thanks for giving me a chance I probably don't deserve." Her reply came instantly. "We'll see about that." The weeks that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Claire texted him book recommendations, leadership books, communication guides, things Jake would never have thought to read on his own. He started with one, struggling through the first chapter during his lunch breaks, and was surprised to find himself actually engaged. He'd text her his thoughts, usually something clumsy and half-formed, and she'd respond with encouragement or gentle challenges to his thinking. 3 weeks in, Claire suggested meeting at the park near Jake's apartment. "I want to meet Ethan," she'd said over the phone. "If we're going to be friends, I should know the most important person in your life." Ethan had been vibrating with excitement all morning. "Is she nice? Will she like my drawings? Can I show her my rock collection?" Jake had answered yes to all of it, while privately terrifying himself with all the ways this could go wrong. But when Claire rolled up to the park bench where they waited, Ethan's first question wasn't about the wheelchair. It was, Do you like Triceratops or Velociraptors better? Claire didn't miss a beat. Triceratops for defense, Velociraptors for strategy. What about you? T-Rex, Ethan announced, then launched into a 10-minute explanation of bite force ratios that he'd learned from a library book. Claire listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made Ethan's face light up. When he finally paused for breath, she pulled out her tablet and showed him a digital drawing program. I do design work sometimes, she explained. Want to try drawing a dinosaur on this? For the next hour, Jake watched his son and this woman he barely knew create increasingly elaborate digital dinosaur scenes. Claire taught Ethan about layers and color blending, her voice patient and warm. At one point, Ethan drew a picture of 3 figures, a tall one, a small one, and one in a wheelchair, all standing in front of a volcano. That's you, me, and Dad, Ethan explained to Claire. We're a team escaping the lava. Claire's eyes got shiny. She blinked rapidly and smiled at Ethan. Best team I've ever been on, kiddo. On the drive home, Ethan chattered non-stop about Miss Claire and how cool her drawing program was, and could they see her again soon. Please, Dad, please? Jake said yes, they could, and tried to ignore the warmth spreading through his chest. This was friendship, he reminded himself. Just friendship. Claire was helping him the way you'd help any friend. It didn't mean anything more. But 2 months later, when Jake mentioned he was considering taking evening classes to get his HVAC certification, Claire made an offer that stopped him cold. I'll watch Ethan, she said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? He can come to my place, do his homework, we'll order pizza. It's not a big deal. Claire, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference. Her tone left no room for argument. Besides, Ethan and I are working on a dragon illustration series. We're only 3 dragons in. We need at least 12 for the full zodiac. Jake wanted to say no. His pride, the same pride that had kept him and Ethan afloat through the worst years, screamed at him to refuse. But another part of him, the part that was so bone-tired he sometimes fell asleep standing up in the shower, whispered, Let someone help you. Just this once. Okay, he said quietly. But I'm paying you. Try it and I'll have Ethan teach you about Ankylosaurus defense mechanisms firsthand. Claire shot back. Friends help friends, Jake. Get used to it. The classes were harder than Jake expected. He'd been out of school for 17 years, and sitting in a classroom full of younger students made him feel ancient. But every Tuesday and Thursday, he'd drop Ethan at Claire's apartment, a sleek place in the Pearl District that made Jake's 2-bedroom look like a closet, and spend 3 hours learning about refrigeration systems and electrical codes. Claire's apartment was minimalist and expensive in a way that made Jake uncomfortable. Clean lines, designer furniture, artwork that was probably worth more than his truck. But she never made him feel less than for noticing. Instead, she'd greet Ethan at the door with enthusiasm, asking about his day, already pulling up their latest dragon project on her massive monitor. One evening, Jake arrived early to pick up Ethan and found him asleep on Claire's couch, covered with a soft blanket, while Claire worked quietly at her desk. She had reading glasses on, her face illuminated by 3 monitors displaying spreadsheets and presentations that looked complicated enough to make Jake's head hurt. Sorry, Jake whispered. I can take him home. Claire looked up, pulled off her glasses. He conked out about 20 minutes ago, finished his math homework, ate his weight in pepperoni pizza, then just crashed. She smiled. He's a good kid, Jake. You're doing something right. Jake felt his throat tighten. Some days I'm not sure about that. Well, I am. Claire rolled closer to where he stood. He's kind. He's curious. He says please and thank you without being prompted. He talks about you like you hung the moon. Those things don't happen by accident. In the dim light of the apartment, with his son sleeping peacefully nearby, Jake let himself really look at Claire. She'd changed from her work blazer into a simple sweater, her hair down for once, falling past her shoulders. She looked softer like this. Younger. The perpetual guardedness in her eyes had eased. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said quietly. "Depends on the question." "Why are you doing this? Really doing this? You don't owe me anything. You barely know me." Claire was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the arm of her wheelchair. "When I was 10 years old, I saw a teenage boy sitting in a car outside the grocery store where my grandmother shopped. It was winter, freezing, and he was just sitting there, no coat, looking like he hadn't eaten in days." She paused. "I'd saved up $12 from helping my grandmother with her alteration work. I went into the store, bought sandwiches and a cheap scarf, and gave them to him. He looked at me like I'd handed him the world." Jake's heart started pounding. "Claire!" "I don't know what happened to that boy," she continued, not meeting his eyes. "I like to think he made it, that he found his way to something better." She finally looked at him. "You remind me that kindness matters, Jake, that sometimes the smallest gesture can save someone's life. I want to be that for Ethan, and maybe for you too." Jake's hand went unconsciously to his pocket, where he still carried, after all these years, a worn blue scarf. The one a little girl in a wheelchair had given him 20 years ago, when he was 15 and living in his mother's car. When he'd been so hungry and cold, he'd seriously considered just not waking up the next morning. He'd never known her name, never saw her again after that day. But he'd kept the scarf, and when things got hard, when Ivy left, when the bills piled up, when Ethan cried and Jake didn't know how to fix it, he'd hold that scarf and remember, someone saw me, someone cared. "It was you," he whispered, pulling the scarf from his pocket with shaking hands. "Claire, it was you." She stared at the faded blue fabric, her eyes going wide. "Jake, her voice cracked. "I gave that to a boy named, I never knew his name. He was just a kid who looked lost and—" "Jacob Morrison," Jake said. "But I went by Jacob back then. Started using Jake after I aged out of foster care, after I decided to become someone different." The silence stretched between them, heavy with 20 years of not knowing, of parallel lives that had somehow circled back to each other. Claire reached out with trembling fingers and touched the scarf. "You kept it," she whispered. "It saved my life," Jake said simply. "I was planning to—" He stopped, glanced at sleeping Ethan. "I was in a dark place. And then this little girl, who had every reason to ignore the world's problems, gave me sandwiches and warmth and just saw me as human. After that, I couldn't give up." Claire's face crumpled. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jake knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level, and without thinking, reached out and took her hands. They were small and strong, and they gripped his like lifelines. "You saved me twice," he said, his own voice breaking. "Once when you gave me a reason to keep going, and now, by giving me a reason to be better." "Jake," she pulled one hand free, touched his face gently. "I didn't know. All this time, I didn't know." "How could you?" He smiled through the tears that were definitely not falling from his eyes. "But Claire, doesn't this feel like maybe we were supposed to find each other again? Like maybe the universe is less random than we think?" She laughed, a watery sound. "I don't believe in fate." "Neither do I," Jake admitted. "But I'm starting to believe in second chances." Something shifted between them in that moment, the careful boundary they'd maintained crumbling. This wasn't just friendship anymore. Maybe it never had been. Jake saw it in the way Claire was looking at him, like he was something precious and terrifying all at once. He felt it in his own chest, the way his heart seemed to beat differently when she was near, but neither of them said it out loud. Not that night. Instead, Jake gathered Ethan carefully, whispered thank you to Claire, and went home. He lay awake until 3 in the morning, holding that blue scarf, and wondering how you told someone that you were falling in love with them when you were still terrified they'd realize you weren't enough. The months blurred together after that. Spring turned to summer. Ethan finished 2nd grade with Claire at his awards ceremony, cheering louder than anyone when he got a certificate for Most Creative Artist. Jake passed his HVAC certification exam, and Claire took them both out to dinner to celebrate, insisting on paying despite Jake's protests. They fell into something that looked like family, but neither of them named. Ethan started calling her Miss Claire, less and just Claire more. Jake found himself texting her about small things. Funny things, Ethan said. Frustrations at work. Articles he thought she'd like. She responded with the same energy, sharing her day, asking his opinion on decisions, sending him terrible puns that made him laugh despite himself. But there were moments that felt like more. The way Claire's hand would linger on his arm when she was making a point. The way Jake found himself watching her interact with Ethan and feeling something warm and terrifying unfold in his chest. The way they'd catch each other's eyes across the room and have to look away because the intensity was too much. Jake was afraid to name it, afraid that if he acknowledged what was happening, it would shatter like everything good in his life eventually did. Claire was successful, educated, wealthy in ways Jake would never be. She had a modified apartment that probably cost more per month than he made in 3. She wore clothes that were understated but expensive. She belonged to a world Jake had only ever observed from the outside. What could he possibly offer her? A 2-bedroom apartment with perpetually sticky kitchen floors and a kid who left dinosaur toys everywhere. A future of being the guy who fixed other people's air conditioning while she ran boardrooms? The doubts crept in slowly, like water under a door. And they crystallized into certainty one afternoon in May, when Jake dropped Ethan off at Claire's building and saw her outside, deep in conversation with a man in an expensive suit. The man was laughing at something Claire said, touching her shoulder familiarly, and Claire looked completely at ease. Natural, like she belonged in that world of polished shoes and business lunches. Jake drove away before she saw him, a sick feeling in his stomach. That was her real life. This thing with him and Ethan, it was charity, wasn't it? A successful woman helping out a struggling single dad? He'd been kidding himself thinking it could be anything more. He started responding to her texts slower. Made excuses why Ethan couldn't come over as often. Buried himself in work, taking extra jobs, anything to avoid the feeling that he was setting himself up for another ivy-shaped heartbreak. Claire noticed. Of course she did. Her texts became more pointed. Is everything okay? Then, did I do something wrong? Then finally, Jake, talk to me, please. He didn't know how to explain that he hadn't done anything wrong. That the problem was him had always been him, that he was the guy women left, not the guy they chose. But then on a Thursday evening in June, his phone lit up with a text that changed everything. Jake, can we talk tomorrow? There's something I need to tell you. Everything. He stared at that message for 3 hours, his mind racing through possibilities. She'd met someone. She was moving. She was done pretending to care about a mechanic and his kid. He finally typed back, "Okay." The next evening, Claire texted him an address. Not her apartment. An office building downtown. 42 stories of glass and steel with a logo Jake vaguely recognized. TechRise Solutions. He'd seen their ads, knew they did something with software and data security, knew they were one of Portland's major success stories. The lobby was all marble and modern art. Jake felt grotesquely out of place in his work jeans and flannel. The receptionist, a polished woman with a headset, smiled at him. "Mr. Morrison, Ms. Hartwell is expecting you. Top floor." Ms. Hartwell. Something about the formal name made Jake's stomach drop. The elevator ride to floor 42 felt like ascending to another planet. When the doors opened, he stepped into a space that was more art gallery than office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Portland's skyline, minimalist furniture. And at the far end, through glass walls, an enormous corner office. Claire sat inside, backlit by the sunset. Behind her, mounted on the wall in letters that must have been 2 feet tall, Claire Hartwell, CEO and founder, TechRise Solutions. Jake's brain short-circuited. He stood frozen, staring at those words, while his understanding of reality reorganized itself around this new, impossible information. CEO, founder, not department head, not comfortable, founder of a company worth, he didn't even know how much, but probably more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes. Claire wheeled out from behind her desk, and Jake saw her clearly in this context for the first time. She wasn't just successful, she was powerful. This was her empire, built from nothing, and she commanded it absolutely. "I was going to tell you on our first date," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Then I thought I'd wait until you knew me. Then I was too scared you'd hate me for lying." "Department head." Jake's voice came out hollow. "You said department head." "I know, I'm sorry, I just—" Claire stopped in front of him. "Every man who knew walked away, or stayed for the wrong reasons. I built this company from my grandmother's garage when I was 23 years old, made my first million at 28. And the more successful I became, the more impossible it was to find someone who saw me. Just me. Not the CEO, not the money, not the inspiring disabled woman who overcame adversity." Her voice shook. "I just wanted someone to see Claire." Jake felt like he was drowning. "So you thought I was like them? After 7 months of me showing you exactly who I am?" "No," Claire said desperately. "No, Jake, you were different from the start. That's why I couldn't tell you. Because what we had was real, and I was terrified that the second you knew about all this—" She gestured around the office. "It would change. You'd either leave because you felt inadequate, or you'd stay because you thought I could fix all your problems. And I couldn't lose you. I couldn't lose what we had." "What we had," Jake repeated. His hand went to his pocket, where a small velvet box had been burning a hole for the past week. He pulled it out, set it on her desk. "I bought this 3 days ago. I was going to ask you to marry me tonight." Claire stared at the box, her face going white. "Jake!" "But I was going to ask Claire, the woman who ate ramen with me and Ethan, who laughed at my terrible jokes, who I thought saw me for who I really am." He took a breath that hurt. "I don't know who you are." "Yes, you do," Claire said fiercely. "Everything between us was real. The friendship, the dinners, the time with Ethan. All of it was real. This—" She gestured at the office. "This is just what I do. It's not who I am." "Isn't it?" Jake's voice cracked. "You run a multi-million-dollar company. You make decisions that affect hundreds of people. You live in a world I can't even begin to understand. And you lied to me. For 7 months, you lied." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything." "That's the same thing." Jake's hands were shaking. "Claire, I spent 7 months falling in love with you. 7 months thinking maybe I'd found someone who could love me back. Someone who didn't see me as too broken, too poor, too much of a disaster. And the whole time, you were—" He gestured helplessly. "You were this. And I'm just a guy who fixes air conditioners." "Stop it!" Claire's voice was sharp. "Don't do that. Don't diminish yourself to make this easier." "Easier?" Jake laughed bitterly. "Nothing about this is easy. You want to know what's hard? Walking into this building and realizing that every insecurity I've ever had about not being enough is completely justified. You want to know what's impossible? Imagining a future where I'm not just the charity case you helped out of the goodness of your heart. That's not fair. Isn't it?" Jake met her eyes. Be honest with me now, Claire, because you owe me that much. Was this charity? Was I your project? The poor single dad who needed saving? Claire's face crumpled. How can you ask me that? After everything— Because I need to know! Jake's voice rose. I need to know if any of it was real. If you felt what I felt. Or if I was just— His voice broke. If I was just another person you saved. The silence that fell between them was deafening. Through the windows, Portland stretched out below them, tiny lights beginning to flicker on as dusk deepened. Jake thought about leaving, about walking out and never looking back, protecting what was left of his pride. But then Claire spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you remember what you said to me that first day at the cafe? You said you didn't have the capacity for me, that you were already stretched too thin. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. I stayed because, for the first time in my entire life, someone needed me. Not my money, not my company, not my inspiring story, just me. Ethan needed someone to teach him fractions and draw dragons with him. You needed someone to believe you could be more than you thought you were. And I needed— Her voice broke. God, Jake. I needed to feel useful in a way that mattered, not as a CEO, not as a success story, just as Claire. Jake's anger cracked, because he heard the truth in her words, saw it in her face. This was the same woman who'd given a starving teenager a scarf 20 years ago, who'd spent countless evenings helping his son with homework, who'd believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. I love you, Claire said desperately. I love the way you cut Ethan's sandwiches into dinosaur shapes because he eats better that way. I love that you cry at Pixar movies and pretend it's just allergies. I love that you're terrified of failing but you keep trying anyway. I love you, Jake Morrison. Not the man you think you should be. The man you are. Jake's chest felt like it was caving in. But you lied to me. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Claire reached for his hand, and Jake let her take it, even though everything in him was screaming to run. I was wrong. I should have trusted you with the truth. I should have believed that you'd see past the money and the title. But I was scared. And I let that fear hurt you. She squeezed his hand. I can't take it back, but I can promise that from this moment on you'll know everything. No more secrets, no more hiding. Jake looked down at their joined hands. I wanted to give you something, he said quietly. A ring, a future, a family. But what do I have to offer you, Claire? You built an empire. I struggle to pay rent on time. You have to stop measuring yourself by what you don't have, Claire said fiercely. Do you want to know what you've given me? A reason to come home at night. A kid who draws me pictures and asks my opinion on dinosaur facts. A man who looks at me and sees Claire, not a CEO in a wheelchair. You've given me a family, Jake. The thing I've wanted my whole life and never thought I'd have. So don't you dare tell me you don't have anything to offer. Claire. Jake's resolve was crumbling. I talked to my board yesterday. She continued. I'm stepping down as CEO. Marcus Webb, my CFO, will take over day-to-day operations. I'll stay on the board, but I want time. Time for a life. Time for Sunday mornings and school plays and teaching Ethan to ride a bike. Time for us, if you'll still have me. Jake stared at her. You're quitting your company? For me? I'm not quitting. I'm choosing a different kind of success. Claire's smile was watery. Turns out having everything doesn't mean much if you don't have anyone to share it with. And I want to share it with you and Ethan. If you can forgive me. If you can trust me again. Jake thought about Ethan's drawings. 3 people holding hands. A family. He thought about the way Claire listened when Ethan talked. Really listened. Like every word mattered. He thought about how she'd pushed him to go back to school, to believe he could be more. He thought about a little girl giving a stranger a scarf and saving his life. Some people, Jake realized, were worth forgiving, worth risking everything for. "I don't need you to step down," he said slowly. "I need you to be honest. About everything. The money, the company, all of it. No more hiding." "I promise," Claire said immediately. "And I need time to wrap my head around this, to figure out how we make this work when our lives are so different." "We have time," Claire said. "All the time you need." Jake picked up the ring box from the desk. "I'm not ready to ask you this tonight. Maybe not for a while. But I'm not walking away either. Because you're right. What we have is real. And I'm tired of running from real things." Claire let out a sob laugh, pulling him into a hug that was awkward because of the height difference in the wheelchair, but perfect anyway. "I'll wait," she whispered against his chest. "However long it takes." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while the city lights grew brighter below them. And when they finally pulled apart, Jake saw not a CEO or a success story or a woman in a wheelchair. He saw Claire, just Claire, and that was enough. 3 days later, Jake texted her. "Riverside Cafe. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. I have something to ask you." Claire arrived exactly on time, her face carefully neutral, but Jake could see the hope and fear warring in her eyes. He was already seated at the same table where they'd met 8 months ago. Full circle. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he replied. Then, "I've been thinking about what you said. About wanting someone to see you. Not the wheelchair, not the money. Just you." "Jake, let me finish." He took a breath. "I realized I did the same thing to you. I wanted you to see me as a good dad, a hard worker. Not the guy who lived in a car, not the guy whose wife left him. I hid parts of myself too. I was so focused on not being a burden that I couldn't accept help. Couldn't accept that someone might actually want to be part of my life, not out of pity, but because they loved me." He pulled the blue scarf from his pocket, set it on the table between them. 20 years ago, a little girl gave me this when I had nothing. She didn't see a homeless kid. She saw someone cold who needed warmth. You saved me twice, Claire. Once with a scarf, once with a chance to be better." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I don't have a company," Jake continued. "I can't give you corner offices or board meetings, but I can give you ramen dinners and Ethan's terrible knock-knock jokes and a man who sees you, all of you, and chooses you every single day." He slid out of his chair, knelt down beside her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. From his pocket, he pulled out the ring box. "Claire Hartwell, I'm a mechanic with a second-hand truck and a kid who thinks mac and cheese is gourmet cooking, but I'm also the man who loves you, not despite who you are, but because of all of it. The CEO, the survivor, the woman who draws dragons with my son and believes in me when I don't believe in myself. Will you marry me?" Claire was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe the tears away. "Only if you promise never to fix my wheelchair," she said, her voice shaking with laughter. "I pay good money for professional maintenance." "Deal," Jake said, grinning. "Then yes, 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 yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, a simple band with a small diamond, all he could afford, but Claire looked at it like it was made of stars. They kissed there in the cafe, while the same barista who'd watched their first awkward meeting 8 months ago smiled and quietly started a slow clap that spread through the whole room. When they pulled apart, Jake heard a familiar voice shriek, "She said yes!" He turned to see Ethan running from the back of the cafe, where Jake had stashed him with a hot chocolate and strict instructions to stay hidden. The boy launched himself at both of them, wrapping his arms around Jake and Claire in a tangle of pure joy. "Does this mean I get a mom now?" Ethan asked, his face pressed against Claire's shoulder. Claire pulled back to look at him, her hand cupping his cheek. "If you'll have me, kiddo." "Best day ever," Ethan announced to the entire cafe, which earned them another round of applause. Jake watched his son and the woman he loved, their heads bent together as Ethan immediately started planning what kind of cake they'd have at the wedding. "It has to have dinosaurs, Claire. It has to." Something tight and painful in Jake's chest finally loosened. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not conventional, but real and chosen and fought for. Claire caught his eye over Ethan's head, and her smile was radiant. "Take us home?" she asked. "Yeah," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "Let's go home." 6 months later, on a crisp October afternoon, they gathered in the same park where Claire had first met Ethan. The ceremony was small, just a handful of people who mattered. Mrs. Laura from Jake's apartment building, who'd predicted this outcome from the start. A few of Jake's co-workers. Marcus Webb from TechRise, who'd become an unexpected friend. Claire's grandmother, who'd made the trip from Eugene and cried through the entire ceremony. Claire wore a simple cream dress and navigated the grass path in her wheelchair without hesitation. Ethan walked beside her as ring bearer, wearing a suit he'd picked out himself and a tie covered in tiny T-Rexes that Claire had special ordered. When they reached the flower-covered arch where Jake waited, Ethan handed over the rings with exaggerated care, then stage-whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't mess this up, Dad." The laughter that rippled through the small gathering was warm and genuine. Jake took Claire's hands in his, and for a moment he couldn't speak. She looked so beautiful it hurt, but more than that, she looked happy. Truly, deeply happy. The officiant cleared her throat gently, and Jake found his voice. "Claire," he began, abandoning the vows he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. "I spent a long time thinking I knew what I needed. I thought I needed someone to help me, someone to share the burden. But you taught me that love isn't about carrying each other's weight. It's about being strong enough to be weak together. It's about seeing each other completely and choosing each other anyway." Claire's thumb traced circles on the back of his hand, a gesture so familiar now it felt like breathing. "You saw me when I was invisible," Jake continued. 20 years ago and 8 months ago. You saw me, and you decided I was worth saving. But the truth is we saved each other. And I promise to keep seeing you, every day, in every way, for the rest of my life." Claire was crying, but she was smiling too. "I'm supposed to wait for my turn," she said, voice watery. "Since when do you wait for anything?" Jake teased gently. She laughed, wiped her eyes and took a breath. "Jake Morrison, I spent most of my life building walls, protecting myself from pity, from people who wanted to fix me or use me or put me on a pedestal. I built a company, built a career, built an entire life. But I was doing it alone. And then you walked into that cafe and saw me. Not the wheelchair, not the CEO, just me." She paused, gathering herself. "You taught me that being seen is terrifying and necessary. That letting someone help you isn't weakness, it's trust. That the family you choose can be just as powerful as the family you're born into. I promise to let you see me, the good and the difficult. I promise to see you right back. And I promise to love Ethan like he's mine, because he is. You both are. I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said, beaming. "Jake, you may kiss your bride." He did, leaning down to meet her, and the kiss tasted like salt and hope and coming home. Ethan cheered so loudly he startled a flock of birds from a nearby tree, and everyone laughed. At the small reception afterward, in a restaurant overlooking the river, Jake found himself standing slightly apart from the celebration, just watching. Claire was showing Mrs. Laura something on her phone, probably pictures of the honeymoon they were planning, a cabin in the mountains, accessible and quiet, where they could just be together. Ethan was explaining dinosaur facts to Marcus Webb, who was listening with the kind of patient attention that made Jake grateful they'd become friends. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire, even though she was only 15 feet away. "Stop overthinking. Come dance with your wife." Jake looked up to find her watching him, that knowing smile on her face. She'd wheeled slightly away from the others, creating space. An invitation. He crossed to her, took her hand, and they swayed together to music only they could hear. "I love you," he said quietly, just for her. "I know," she replied, eyes twinkling. "I'm very lovable. And humble. That too." She pulled him closer. "Thank you, Jake." "For what?" "For not walking out of that cafe. For taking a chance on us. For being brave enough to let me love you." Jake thought about all the moments that had led here. A little girl giving a stranger a scarf. A matchmaker taking a risk. Two broken people deciding to be honest with each other. "I think we were always going to find each other," he said. "Maybe not that cafe. Maybe not that day. But somehow, somewhere. We were always going to find our way back." "I don't believe in fate," Claire reminded him, but her smile was soft. "Neither do I," Jake said. "But I believe in second chances, and third ones, and however many it takes to get it right." "We got it right," Claire said with certainty. "This, you, me, Ethan, this is right." Ethan appeared beside them, tugging on Jake's sleeve. "Dad, can Claire and I tell everyone about our new project?" "What new project?" Jake asked, though he was smiling. "We're starting a foundation," Claire explained. "For single parents and kids with disabilities, mentorship programs, financial assistance, community support. Ethan's going to be our junior advisor. I'm going to make sure the logo has dinosaurs," Ethan announced seriously. Jake looked between them, his heart so full it ached. "Of course you are. We were going to tell you," Claire added. "But someone kept crying during the vows." "You cried too," Jake protested. "I'm the bride. I'm allowed." She squeezed his hand. "What do you think? The Second Chances Foundation?" Jake thought about the scarf in his pocket, the one he'd carry with him always, about the boy he'd been and the man he'd become, about the woman who'd saved him twice, and the son who'd given him a reason to keep going. "I think it's perfect," he said. "I think we're going to help a lot of people." "We already are," Claire said, glancing at the small gathering of people who'd become their family. "Just by being us." Later that evening, after the guests had left and Ethan had fallen asleep in the car on the way home, Jake carried his son upstairs while Claire waited in the parking lot. When he came back down, she was sitting in her van, looking up at the stars visible between the buildings. "Ethan wants to know if we're going to have a baby," Jake said, sliding into the passenger seat. Claire's eyebrows shot up. "He asked you that tonight?" "He asked me last week. I told him we'd talk about it together, as a family." Jake took her hand. "So, do you want to talk about it?" Claire was quiet for a moment, her thumb rubbing circles on his palm. "I don't know if I can," she said finally. "The doctors have always said my disability complicates things. It might not be possible. That's not what I asked. I asked if you want to." She turned to look at him, vulnerability written across her face. "I want Ethan to have a sibling. I want to give you that if I can. But Jake, if I can't, then we have Ethan, and we have each other, and that's more than enough." Jake said firmly. "But if you want to try, we try. And if it doesn't work, we love the family we have. There's no wrong answer here, Claire. Only what we decide together." "Together," she repeated, like she was still getting used to the word. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." Jake leaned over and kissed her temple. "No more secrets, remember? We figure this out as we go." "As we go," Claire agreed. She started the van, pulled out of the parking lot, and headed toward home, The house they'd bought together. The one with the ramp Jake had installed, and the home office Claire had designed, and the bedroom that was slowly being taken over by Ethan's dinosaur collection. As they drove through Portland's quiet streets, Jake thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain and the hope, the lies and the truth, the fear and the courage. He thought about a scared 15-year-old boy and a determined 10-year-old girl, and how sometimes the people who save us are the ones we're meant to find again. "Hey, Claire," he said as they pulled into their driveway. "Yeah?" "Thank you for the scarf." She understood immediately what he meant. Not just the physical scarf from 20 years ago, but everything it represented. The warmth when he was cold, the hope when he was hopeless, the belief that he was worth saving. "Thank you for keeping it," she said quietly, "for keeping yourself alive long enough for me to find you again." They sat in the driveway for a few more minutes, neither wanting to break the moment. Through the window, they could see the light Jake had left on in the living room, casting a warm glow. Home, family, love that had been earned and chosen and fought for. "Ready?" Claire asked. Jake looked at the house, thought about Ethan sleeping upstairs, thought about the woman beside him who'd somehow become his whole world. "Yeah," he said, smiling. "Let's go home." And they did, together, exactly as they were always meant to be.